Sayın hocalarım, sayın meslektaşlarım ve değerli katılımcılar. Muhasebe öğretim üyeleri Bilim ve Dayanışma Vakfı'nın düzenlediği muhasebenin yeni dinamikleri, teori ve uygulamadaki dönüşüm temalı 18. Uluslararası Muhasebe Konferansı'nın Doktora Kolokyumu bölümüne hoş geldiniz. Sizleri saygıyla selamlıyorum. Dear participants, welcome to the Doctoral Colloquium section of the MÖDAVICA 18th International Conference on Accounting, whose theme is New Dynamics of Accounting, Transformation in Theory and Practice. Öncelikle sizleri Türkiye Cumhuriyeti'nin kurucusu, Büyük Önder Atatürk, silah arkadaşları ve şehitlerimiz ile muhasebe bilimine emek vermiş, ancak bugün hayatta olmayan hocalarımızın anısına bir dakikalık saygı duruşuna ve ardından İstiklal Marşımızı söylemeye davet ediyorum. A one moment of silence and Turkish National Anthem. Doktora Kolokyumu'nun açılış konuşmasını yapmak üzere Muhasebe Öğretim Üyeleri Bilim ve Dayanışma Vakfı Başkanı Profesör Doktor Sayın Nuran Cömert hocamı mikrofona davet ediyorum. I would like to invite Dr. Cömert to give her speech as the opening speech of the Doctoral Colloquium of the 18th International Conference. This is your turn.
Thank you, John. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Doctoral Colloquium organized by MÖDAV, Turkish Accounting Academicians Collaboration and Research Foundation in conjunction with the 18th International Conference on Accounting. The main purpose of this colloquium is to provide an opportunity for doctoral students in accounting to present and discuss their research with distinguished experts apart from their own advisors. Under the current COVID-19 pandemic conditions, we are holding our colloquium and conference virtually this year too. I hope that next year we will hold this colloquium related to the conference face-to-face in a historical place of our country. We wanted to open the colloquium with a keynote speaker that will broaden the horizons of researchers, and for this purpose, we invited Dr. Natalie Tatiana Chureik from Northern Illinois University. I greatly appreciate Dr. Chureik accepting our invitation despite the big time difference between Illinois and Istanbul. I know everyone, including me, is eagerly waiting for her opening speech. But before I leave the word to our esteemed guest, I would like to thank the academicians, doctoral students, moderators, and the organizing committee members for their valuable contribution to the colloquium. I wish you a colloquium day of very fruitful discussions and hope that you find your participation to the colloquium worthwhile. I hope to meet you again at the conference, which will start tomorrow. Thank you for your attention. Herkese çok teşekkür ediyorum katıldıkları için.
Sayın hocalarım, sayın meslektaşlarım ve değerli katılımcılar, şimdi Doktora Kolokyumuna ilişkin ana tema konuşmasına geçiyor ve konuşmasını yapmadan önce Doktor Natalie Tatiana Çurek hakkında kısa bir özgeçmiş sunmak istiyorum. Before introducing Dr. Çurek, I would like to provide you a short biography of her. Dr. Çurek is a professor of accountancy at the Northern Illinois University, and she is also the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Accounting Education. She obtained her PhD in accounting from the University of South Carolina. Her research contributes to topics in financial reporting, fraud, ethics, education, and auditing. So now I would like to invite Dr. Çurek to give her speech. This is your turn, Natalie. Thank you for joining us today.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much to have me here speaking today. I want to thank the conference organizers and also Dr. Aslan for inviting me. Over the years. We've been trying to arrange this, and so finally we are able to meet. I wish I was in person, but this will do for now. So I'm going to share my screen, if that's okay. And
yes,
I
you
have
can share directly.
Okay. Okay. So today I'm going to speak to you about getting past some pain points and addressing common publication process problems. I will be using or speaking from the perspective of an editor, but also I have over 50 publications in various journals, not only education journals, which is what my particular role is now as editor-in-chief of the Journal of Accounting Education. So again, it's coming from that perspective, and the perspective of an education journal is not much different than any other journal that you publish in, because we have the same review processes, we have the same problems. So as when I refer to the JED, which is how I abbreviate Journal of Accounting Education, a lot of this applies to other journals as well, and I will mention that. So one caveat I would like to point out at the beginning is that many people think that accounting education is of lesser quality and or rigor than non-accounting education. And it's not true. It can be different when we get to the teaching case aspect of it, but the actual research papers that are submitted are identical to the methodologies that you would find in any other academic journal. So they could be archival, they could be survey, they happen to be related to accounting education. And so I picked two recent articles just to stress that point, one by Tim Fogarty that came out recently in this latest issue, which talks about successful academic accounting departments. And then here is more of a behavioral one dealing with mediation effects. So this misconception that a lot of universities have is a shame. And what I want to mention to all the doctoral students that are here now, when you take your position at your university, you're going to want to find out what that university values as far as research. You want to make sure that you target the journals that your specific university is okay with you targeting. Another misconception, and we'll talk more about the teaching cases later, is that teaching cases are easy to publish. They're actually not easy at all because everyone is an expert in their field. We all teach as part of our roles as academics. And so whenever you try to submit a case, everyone has an opinion. Those reviewers are going to say, no, I teach this class. I don't think it can be done this way. So what I find is that teaching cases take a lot longer to publish. A lot of authors will submit a case after just using it once, not acceptable, and we'll talk about that later. And you see here on the slide that there's some efficacy requirements. So my first thing that I'd like to mention about any type of publication, what you should know before you submit to a journal. Look at the guide for authors. Every single journal has this guide. They may not call it guide for authors. It may be submission requirements. It's very important that you read that. Many people don't read it, and you'll see when we get near the end of the presentation today that a lot of papers get rejected or just even desk rejected because people don't read the mission of the journal itself. So understand the target. What is it that you want to contribute and what journal is best for that contribution? And again, you'll find it on every journal's webpage. You'll find the review board members. You'll find a lot of interesting information on the websites. Formatting. So once you've read the guides for authors related to submission, you will want to format it for that journal. My journal doesn't require you to submit it in a special form, but when you think about when you're submitting to a journal, don't you want it to look like the papers that are in there as far as the spacing requirements, the headings, whether they're left justified or whether they're centered? And I say this because I know, for instance, Advances in Accounting Education has a very specific format. So does Issues in Accounting Education, Journal of Forensic Accounting Research, the Accounting Review. They all follow different formats. But since I'm dealing with an education journal, I know when a paper that has been submitted to me has been rejected from a different education journal. How do I know this? Because it's formatted for that journal. And the authors don't take the time to format it to the way the Journal of Accounting Education requirements are once you get accepted. So again, you don't have to format it for my journal. However, at the very end, if your paper should get accepted, it does become formatted at that point, but demonstrate to the reviewers and to me that you actually have an interest in that you didn't just throw a paper over because it didn't get in somewhere else. So what else do I find beforehand? I find that papers are submitted too early. They're not ready. And I've been guilty of this too. At some point in, I think in every researcher's career, they may have had a co-author that said, let's get it, let's send it out. And they're pressuring you to send it out and you know it's not ready yet. And it happens. But when you send them out too soon and it gets rejected from a journal, you can't submit to that journal again. So the best advice I have is have your colleagues read the paper. Once you think it's in final form, have them read it. And of course, if you can present at conferences like many of you are doing today, you get a lot of valuable feedback. Step away from the paper. what I mean by that is that we're often working on the paper so much and so long and so many days that you just don't see your own mistakes. So once you think you're done, put it aside, work on something else for a day or two, then come back and read it, and then you'll see, oh, I thought I said that, and you really didn't. You had it in your head, and you were so used to just reading your paper. So it's very helpful. And I know every one of my papers that I've published, there have been multiple colleagues that have read it for me, multiple presentations. I remember one time I was applying for a grant with a co-author for a PwC grant, and we had to submit our 3 best pages. That's the maximum length that the grant could be, was 3 pages total. We must have had 50 versions of those 3 pages. Is it a little extreme? Yes, we were applying for a grant. But when you are working with your papers, it takes time. And editing is a huge part of it before you even submit it. So another issue before you even submit is that authors, a lot of times, they don't read the articles that have been published in the area or even in the journal that they're submitting to. If you're submitting to the Journal of Accounting Education, I would hope that you would have some citations from the Journal of Accounting Education and not all from Issues in Accounting Education. Same if you're submitting to Accounting Horizons or Journal of Forensic Accounting Research or Journal of Accounting and Economics. Any of those journals, you would be expected to understand what it is that they prefer to publish. Some are more of a professional spin on it. Some journals like pure empirical pieces, others like behavioral. So understand what your journal has already published, what types of articles they publish. Organization's important, especially when it comes to cases. I'm often confused at what the authors have ever looked at when they're submitting an exercise. Actually, I don't think they've ever looked at anything sometimes, and you'll see some statistics later. And if anyone has questions while I'm speaking, I don't know if you want to wait all till the Q&A time or ask now, but if someone really wants to ask a question, feel free to ask a question. I'm not monitoring the chat, so if someone can interrupt me, I'm perfectly fine with that.
Actually, at the end of your presentation, we can have the questions.
So I'm going to talk about a few types of submissions to my journal. We have main articles, which are research articles, like you would submit to most any type of journal. They're either quantitative or qualitative. So what I mean by quantitative would be more regression. Sometimes they're going to be experimental, survey, focus groups. So they're typical research papers. If you use human subjects for surveys, you need to have we call it institutional review board. Other people, other universities call it ethics board. So it's dealing with human subject approval. And descriptive papers are fine. Opinion pieces, we don't publish those so much. Very few journals publish opinion pieces. Why? Because we want evidence. Usually the main articles, they test a hypothesis and they're based upon theories. So as I mentioned, the Journal of Accounting Education, just like every other journal, has these rigorous research articles. Another area that's pretty large for the journal and most educational journals are educational or teaching cases. It always starts off, or should start off, with the case itself. So what does that mean? That means, or the class exercise, what it is that you're handing out to the classroom. And then you have a teaching note that accompanies that. And that has what are the objectives of your case, Then you need efficacy. Efficacy is, perception data alone isn't enough. A lot of faculty will collect survey data from their students that said, oh, I learned a lot about this, or I really liked learning about derivatives, and I learned about beneficial conversion features. And so when you have that, perceptions alone, for me, are not adequate. Why? Because every student has learned a lot. So what does that tell me? Not a whole lot. I want to know, how did they perform, right? So my efficacy, I like performance data. Or if you choose to do a survey, what is their knowledge before? What is their knowledge after? One way to get performance data would be, what are the ranges of scores they had? How did they do on each part of a question? And if everyone gets 100 or a perfect score, that tells me the exercise isn't very rigorous. So it's not as though everyone has to perform wonderful, but what I want to know is, how did they perform? What can other people that adopt this tell? What can you tell those other people how to circumvent some problems you had? So these teaching notes are very rich and they're very important. The solutions get submitted along with the with the submission for review, but they don't get published. If we publish solutions, then the case would be useless. So the topics, any case related to accounting education would be auditing, accounting information systems, governmental, financial reporting. So if you can find it in a textbook, though, it's probably not a good exercise. So, and that's where at the beginning I said, take a look and see what was published. A lot of people submit cases and like, oh, this is really good. And it's like, but they don't understand that, well, the textbook has those, or someone has already published one almost exactly like that. So and this is just another slide, and I'm pretty sure these are getting recorded, or if you want a copy of my slides, you could have my slides afterwards. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot more time on these objectives of the case, just so you can see the different parts. Here. We also, all right, a different one. I think I went, okay, there's the back. We have educational notes, which is more of a shorter empirical piece, or they're in-class exercises. So they're not full research papers, but they're also not, or they're not case studies. They're more of a class exercise. And I have a few of these from each category at the end of the slides there. And if you are doing a class exercise, even though you're categorizing it as a teaching or educational note, you still need to have efficacy. Best practices are rare. I now have one under review for a best practice. I think it may have just been accepted. And there's one other. It's hard to say that it's a best practice. I've had some submitted. Maybe they use their student income tax group, the VITA, and they work with the community. Well, I think every university does that with this particular organization. And so that wasn't a best practice or unique. So, but we do have this category. And if you should happen to think that what your university is doing or what your classroom is doing is really special and others can learn from that, you may want to submit it into best practice. If it doesn't qualify as a best practice, but it's a good educational note, I could always switch categories. So this review process is not unique to my journal, but I do believe a lot of people are Did I get muted somehow?
Yes.
Okay, did it just start now?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you. So the author submits a manuscript. And for me, it comes to me, the editor, and usually it goes to every editor of every journal. So whatever journal you submit to, it starts with the key person. Now, the way I work it is I assign all the reviewers, unless there's special issues. And then the special issues are a different thing where I have the guest editors do the assigning. So I find the reviewers, and at this point, it could take quite some time. So if you're ever on an editorial review board or asked to review a paper and you are not able to review it, reject the review immediately. Because what happens is that some reviewers will wait the 2 weeks and say, oh no, I don't have time. Then they will decline the review after 2 weeks. And then it just put me 2 weeks behind in finding a second reviewer or both reviewers. So if you're on a review board or if you review and you know you're not going to be able to do it, decline immediately. There's no problem with declining it. At least for me as editor, I'd rather know you can't do it than have you hold up the whole process. So once I find 2 reviewers, I then assign the paper to an associate editor. Now, I know Issues in Accounting Education does things slightly different. The editor will send the manuscript to the associate editors, and the associate editors, or they have a slightly different terminology, they will find the reviewers. Right? So that's how we differ, and journals will differ depending on how they just their policies. So once I get the reviewers, I assign it to associate editor. Then the reviewers should have 45 days to submit their review. Unfortunately, not everyone submits in a timely manner, and that holds up the process as well. So once the reviewers have submitted the review, the associate editor will look at the reviews and then make their own decision and also provide a review. Not all of them provide reviews, some just summarize, but the majority provide thorough reviews themselves. Then it gets sent back to me for the final decision. And sometimes we have split decisions. Sometimes everyone says major revisions of the same, in line. When it's split, a lot of times the associate editor will make a decision, and then the associate editor will say, well, it depends what the editor wants to do. Then it comes back to me to figure out whether I want to give the authors an opportunity to revise or resubmit, or whether we need to move to reject the paper. And I'll talk a little bit more about that process as well. So once I make a decision, if it's a revise, resubmit, it sits with the authors for however long. They usually have a year to resubmit, but then it goes through the process again. They submit it back after the revision, and then it goes to the same reviewers though, and the same associate editor, and it continues that cycle. Ideally 45 to 60 days, but COVID put it off for a very long time. COVID, for some reason, it's just slowed the whole process down. And I'm sure that's happened with everybody. It's just what's happened. So I took over editor of the journal in 2015. Just so quick stats, I've had over 1,000 papers submitted to me since July of 2015. When I took over, and you can see the numbers were increasing, and then COVID hit and they went down a little, and I have a partial year for now. And so I have to examine quite a few manuscripts, and I process every last one of them at some point, at the beginning and at the end. And here are some statistics that you may find interesting. You see that we get 73% of the submissions are actual research type papers. So with regression or surveys, ANOVAs, qualitative. You can see that 71% of those get rejected. 9% get accepted. And then there's some others that get withdrawn at the beginning. So sometimes if it's not ready, I will send it back to the authors and tell them, that they need to fix something, and then I allow for a resubmission at that point. If it's a reject, they can't resubmit unless it's sometimes out of scope. I don't use this function as much since now I have an option to reject out of scope that didn't used to be an option in our old system. So, and right now I have 30 that are sitting under review in the review process. I think there's about 5 of them that are waiting for me to make a decision that just came in this week. And then there's 16 of those that are with the authors themselves. Cases, I withdraw 32% of the cases up front. Why? Because they don't have the efficacy data. They're not in the right format. They've used it just once. I require multiple uses. Every journal is going to require multiple uses. And so I just kick them back to the author and say, submit when you're ready. But once they go through the process, they take longer as far as days, but there is a higher acceptance rate. And then these technical notes, short communications comprise the other portion of the journal. And a lot of these are fallen in our special issues. So just so you get an idea, some stats. Now, some journals, their overall rejection rate is much higher. In some journals, the rejection rate is much smaller. So you can take a look at your particular journal that you're interested in to get a feel for your chances of publication. So common mistakes for desk reject. So don't even send it to review. It's not related to accounting education. That's the mission of my journal. So that's why I say, no matter what journal you want to send your paper to, make sure it meets the requirements. If you send it to auditing, well, your paper has to be related to auditing, not to financial reporting. So keep that in mind. Plagiarism is quite rampant. And we have a program that does a plagiarism check, and it highlights, and there's all these different colors. I wish I could download it, but I can't because they're great. It tells you exactly where and ties it to the source. And sometimes it just picks up words or titles of tables, and that I look for. But there's some papers that are just copied and pasted from other published papers, and that's not acceptable. Self-identification. When you submit to any journal, you are saying that you are you have anonymously submitted this, and that doesn't happen a lot. A lot of times people will put their names in. I don't understand it, but they do. And that I can't send it for review if your name's there, but often I'll just say remove your name and then resubmit. So this is what I think a lot of people are interested in. These are actually ranked. I had gone through the journal and ranked the top reasons of why research papers have been rejected. And a lot of these same reasons apply to cases as well. It's just not unique. I mean, the literature review wasn't done properly. And so the person thinks they have a unique topic, but it's not unique, or the data doesn't lend itself to a contribution. Writing is important, and I'm fully aware that English is a second language for many people. And I'm okay with that, even in some submissions. Eventually that has to get taken care of, but do your best to have someone write it in proper grammar. So, but this is not, I mean, being that's one of the top ranked things, this is not just for second language. This is for everybody, even where English is a native language. That's where you have your colleagues read your paper. That's where you even get an editor read your paper. A lot of times there's a flawed research methodology. Maybe you're not picking up the right variable, or not teasing out something, a confounding problem. There maybe you ask the wrong questions in a survey, and once you do a survey, there's no going back. Okay. And if there's a fatal flaw, there's not a whole lot you can do. The literature review ties into the insignificant contribution, because if you don't do a recent literature review, sometimes you'll get a paper that's been shopped around. And I get it. I mean, because never throw a paper in the garbage. If it gets rejected someplace, redo it and send it somewhere else. But my advice on that one is make sure you address every single question. And I have a slide on that too, but because a lot of times the same reviewers are the same across journals. So you might get the same reviewer, and then if you didn't do anything, it could be a serious problem. But the literature review, that lends a problem here to that. Inadequate sample, of course, too small, you can't make any generalizations. Poor organization or structure, the reviewers can't follow the paper, nor can I. It's just jumbled all over the place. It's not generalizable. So it's very unique to your university. Well, how does that help everyone else? Right? You need to publish stuff that is generalizable to either your region or to others in some way. Inadequate motivation. Sometimes people find data and they like the data, and so they run with the data. Right? Poor hypothesis development and inadequate conclusion. Let me see. I'm pressing against time here. So with the cases, similar, a lot of the things, inadequate sample, poor grammar, but there I'd already talked at the beginning, lack of efficacy, so no direct assessment data, poor organization, or it's overly complex and there's no way anyone could ever have their students do that. Resubmission errors. Authors fail to address the reviewer's questions or comments. They often fail to reach out to the editor when there's questions about the reviews. Sometimes they don't even look at the reviews. They submit without even addressing a review, because some reviewers type their reviews right in a box and others upload it as an attachment. So make sure you've addressed all reviews. Make sure you have all reviews. There's usually 2 reviewers, an associate editor, and an editor. So you should have some type of comments from 4 people. And if you don't, look for them, find them, reach out to the editor. Be polite. So when I say snarky, some people are just downright rude. They're like, well, between us, we have 100 years of knowledge. Well, that's wonderful, but you're not addressing the question. That doesn't mean that you can ignore the question. And sometimes I get track changed manuscripts. Well, track changing tends to identify the person. And even if it doesn't identify the person, you want to submit a clean manuscript, not something with track changes everywhere. And also when authors resubmit, the best way to do it is question how you solved it and where to find it in the paper. Don't make the reviewer search 20 pages to find where you actually made the change. So question how you fixed it and where. It's very helpful. So here are some examples of papers. I think Apostolou et al. And all of their literature reviews have the best formatting for my journal. They have the headings, the second headings, the tables, the figures. So it's really easy to see how you should format following that. What I liked about Susan Hughes' paper, and I know it's older, but she really had a great paper on how she used the European securities information to have her students develop cases. So instead of publishing an exercise or case, this was how she had them make cases, and this was a great paper. I was really happy about that one. A good educational note means it's not a case study. And this one was by Cynthia Lork. It was on Excel. And you say, oh, well, what's new with Excel? There's a lot of things you can do that's new, but I liked hers for that category. And these two cases, and Marty actually has another one coming through. This one's managerial focused. He has one financial focused coming through. If anyone liked this particular one, that's getting there. And these are different ways for efficacy. So these are just good examples of the different categories and the formatting. So I think I'm right on time, right? I had half an hour for presentation and then 15 Q&A.
Yes, thank you very much. And if you have any questions, please write them to the chat box, please. Hocalarım, sorularınız varsa chat box'a yazabilirsiniz. Yani sözlü de olabilir elbette. Gerektiğinde yardımcı olmaya çalışırız. While you were presenting, we had a question from Professor Özkan. He was asking, he thanks for the presentation, as you can see in the chat box, and he asks you regarding the slide number 15. What does withdrawn by editor mean?
Withdrawn by editor, it used to be a category that I had to use up front, which sometimes I still do use it. I didn't used to have something called reject out of scope. So those papers were withdrawn. Out of scope means not related to accounting and education, right? Because that's my mission. And sometimes I'll withdraw it ahead of time. And that is because maybe there isn't efficacy requirements, maybe there are self-identification, something that I catch ahead of time. So I'll withdraw it and then I'll tell the authors to resubmit. And sometimes what I'll do is I'll use the category reject out of scope and say, you can resubmit once you fix this problem. So I always, upon a resubmission, it'll let me know if it's a duplicate submission. And I will be able to tell from, and then I'll pull up my letter to see what it was, whether I allowed the authors to resubmit. Because occasionally I will have someone resubmit or when I outright rejected the paper.
Okay, thank you very much. Hümeyra Hocam, you have a question, I guess.
Yes, I have a question. Thank you, Natalie, for this informative presentation. Thank you very much. It helps so much. I have a question related with teaching cases. Are you asking for a real company for the teaching cases?
So that's a great question. I don't necessarily need a real company. I know what I do. I mean, I've got stacks of them that I could publish, but I don't. I do 3 new cases a semester and I work with partners from accounting firms. And it's based on their particular clients. And so it's sanitized, it's watered down, so you wouldn't be able to identify the client. So that is okay with me. I know Mahendra, one of my associate editors, he publishes a lot of case studies and he uses real companies, and that is his preference. And he's also involved with issues in accounting education. And so that's the way he goes. Whereas I'm more about a company, but it's specific, maybe related to beneficial conversion features or to going concern or to bankruptcy, or it's having the students do different things, but at a higher level, multiple questions, where if it was an exercise, which would fall into that teaching and educational note category, it doesn't have to be like that. Excel was not based on a real company. It was just something interesting that Cynthia had done in the classroom with the Excel, and it was a really good paper. So no, but it has to, but whatever you do, it has, if you're having the students do auditing or have the students do stuff, you have to make sure that it can happen in reality.
To my knowledge, most of the journals which is printing teaching cases asking for the real companies, and they are asking for a consent to publish form from the protagonists. So for your journal, it is not a must, as I understand.
Correct, because if you have no identifiers of the company, like I said, if they're based on the company, if you look at some of the cases I have published, you'll see that there is no way to identify the company based on the information. So they wouldn't need the company to give permission. And if you're using, I know Mahendra, as I mentioned, he uses a lot of company data, but those are from public sources, like the 10Ks from the SEC website. So you don't need a permission from the company if you're using public information or from newspaper articles.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, Dr. Özkan has an additional question for you. He's asking in the chat box. Once we check the distribution of the authors in the journal's webpage, the vast majority of the authors are from the United States. How can submissions from other countries can be encouraged? Does the journal have a strategy regarding this?
So that's a good question. I wouldn't say, I would think a lot of the published ones, I only publish about 20 a year. So there's not that many that get published. It was a little more when I had several special issues going. And so the publication rate was higher. I do have a breakdown. I can in the system do a breakdown by country. So I think Australia would be the second most country that we get manuscripts from. I have editorial review board members from all over the world. So I've also done special issues with the British Accounting Finance Association, Accounting Education Group, with RMIT in Australia. So I've attempted to get more global submissions. Unfortunately, a lot of the international submissions I find are replications of studies. And if it's already been done in Europe, in China, the US, why would it need to be done in the Middle East? Right? I don't care for replications personally, and that's even within topic areas. So if you flip the classroom in auditing, how is it different than flipping it in tax and financial reporting and systems? Right. So many of the, excuse me, international papers fail plagiarism checks and also are replications. And so that means they have an insignificant contribution. I would highly encourage submissions from other countries. And often what I do to help those along, I always assign one of my international associate editors on there and try to find international reviewers. That way they have a more understanding of the particular environment that that researcher or author is in.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Başka sorusu olan hocam var mı? Okay. Okay, I think there is no other question from our participants, Natalie. Thank you for joining us today in the late evening, I think, in the United States. Thank you for your time. We appreciate your contribution.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate it. And I am going to type my email in case anyone has a question for me. So that's how to contact me. And I would be more than happy to answer any additional questions that you may have.
Okay, as a final point, any questions before finalizing our meeting with Natalie? Anything else that you want to ask me, hocalarım? Okay, I think there is no other question. So I wish you a good day from Turkey, and Thank you having your time with us.
Well, thank you so much, and have a great rest of the conference.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sayın katılımcılar, Doktora Kolokyumu'nun açılış konuşmasını ve oturumunun, ilk oturumunun sonuna gelmiş bulunuyoruz. İzleyen zamanda programdan da takip ederseniz doktora tezlerinin tartışılacağı 3 farklı oturumda ilk gün devam edecek ve ayrı linklerden giriş yapılacak. Katılımınız için şahsım ve düzenleme kurulu adına teşekkür ediyorum. İyi günler diliyorum.